The hospital monitor flatlined at 6:42 a.m., taking my father's final breath with it. I stood in the corridor, clutching his watch and choking back tears, while my husband, Mark, quietly stepped into the stairwell. I assumed he was giving me privacy to grieve. But when we walked through our front door 3 hours later, Mark didn't offer comfort. Instead, he slammed a printed resignation letter onto the kitchen island alongside a luxury sports car brochure. With a cold grin, he announced he was done working forever because my late father's multi-million-dollar estate was now our personal lottery ticket. When I refused to hand over access, his charm turned to venom, threatening to walk away unless every single cent was transferred into a joint account. He thought he had me cornered, until my father's attorney opened the sealed probate envelope and exposed the devastating trap Mark walked right into. My name is Samantha Vance, though most people call me Sam. At 27 years old, I've built a quiet, disciplined career as a freelance corporate researcher, digging into balance sheets and company backgrounds from my home office. I learned that meticulous work ethic from my father, Arthur Vance. Dad was a self-made logistics entrepreneur who started with a single flatbed truck and built a multi-million-dollar transport enterprise. Despite his tremendous success, he never flaunted his wealth. He drove an 8-year-old sedan, lived in the modest brick house where I grew up, and taught me that real security comes from integrity, not arrogance. When Dad's heart finally gave out early this morning, the world felt completely drained of color. Standing in that cold hospital hallway, clutching a silver wristwatch while the nurses quietly disconnected the monitors, I felt an emptiness that tore straight through my ribs. My husband of 4 years, Mark, stood just a few feet behind me. When he slipped away into the stairwell during the final moments, I assumed he was simply giving me space to process the unbearable shock. I believed he was being respectful. I had no idea he was already calculating our next moves. We arrived back at our house by 9 in the morning. My eyes were swollen, my hands numb with exhaustion, and all I wanted was to sit on the couch in total silence. But the second we stepped through the front door, the silence shattered. Mark didn't hang up his coat. He didn't offer to make tea, and he didn't put a comforting hand on my shoulder. Instead, he reached into his leather briefcase, pulled out 2 pieces of paper, and slammed them onto the kitchen island with an aggressive thud. One was an official resignation letter addressed to the vice president of the medical sales firm where he had worked for 5 years. The other was a glossy, full-color dealership brochure for a brand-new German sports car. "It's done," Mark announced, an unmistakable smirk spreading across his face. I sent the formal email from the hospital parking lot. "I am officially done working for other people." I stared at him in sheer disbelief, my voice barely a whisper. "Mark, what are you talking about? My dad just died 3 hours ago." "And that means our entire life just changed, Sam," he replied coldly, leaning across the counter. "Arthur sat on millions. We don't need a 9 to 5 anymore. Tomorrow morning, we go to the bank, set up the joint account, and claim what's ours." Over the next 48 hours, while I tried to organize funeral arrangements and select flowers for my father's service, the mask Mark had worn throughout our entire 4-year marriage slipped away completely. There was no sympathy left in him, only a frantic, unhinged sense of entitlement. By Tuesday afternoon, before we had even finalized the memorial program, Mark took it upon himself to invite his mother and older brother over to our home. I walked out of my home office to find the 3 of them gathered around our dining room table, surrounded by takeout boxes, actively debating which neighborhood in the hills they planned to move into. Mark's mother was already sketching out remodel ideas for a vacation property they assumed Arthur owned, while his brother was asking Mark for a 6-figure seed investment to launch a lifestyle lounge. When I confronted them and told them to leave our house, Mark pulled me into the hallway, his face tight with anger. He told me to stop being dramatic and claimed his family was simply trying to help us manage our sudden upgrade in social status. That evening, after they finally left, I opened our shared desktop computer to print my father's obituary drafts. Sitting in the open browser tabs was a trail of pure delusion. Mark had already submitted pre-qualification inquiries for a multi-million-dollar waterfront penthouse downtown, booked luxury international flight packages for the following month, and put down a holding deposit on a luxury vehicle using our joint emergency checking balance. He was spending money that did not exist yet, treating my father's lifetime of hard labor as an open credit line. When I confronted him in the living room and demanded to know why he was making reckless financial commitments, he didn't even flinch. He crossed his arms and looked down at me with cold calculation. "Listen carefully, Sam," he said, his voice completely stripped of warmth. "We are married. That means whatever Arthur left behind belongs to both of us equally. Tomorrow, you will sign full power of attorney and authorize joint access to the estate accounts. If you try to lock me out or play games with that money, I'll file for divorce immediately and take 50% of everything in court anyway. You decide how easy this is going to be." Mark thought his ultimatum would break me. He expected me to cry, panic, and meekly hand over the keys to my father's life work just to keep our marriage from falling apart. What he forgot was what I do for a living. As a corporate researcher, I spend 40 hours a week untangling hidden assets, auditing balance sheets, and exposing corporate fraud. The moment Mark went to sleep that night, I locked myself in my home office, pulled up my professional databases, and turned my investigative tools directly onto my husband. What I uncovered over the next 6 hours made my blood run cold. Mark hadn't just been careless with our daily budget. He was drowning in catastrophic debt. Over the last 18 months, he had opened 3 separate high-interest personal credit lines in his name, running up over $90,000 in unsecured balances. He had funneled that borrowed money into high-risk, unregulated offshore trading schemes that had completely collapsed, leaving him with mounting default notices and collection threats. His flashy lifestyle at his sales job was an absolute house of cards, teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. Then came the discovery that shattered what little was left of my heart. Digging through the encrypted records on our shared home network, I uncovered an archive of personal text backups dating back 7 months. Mark had been exchanging private messages with an intake coordinator at the regional medical clinic where my father received his routine checkups. My father had been diagnosed with an aggressive, terminal cardiovascular condition 8 months ago, but he had kept it quiet to spare me worry while he arranged his affairs. Mark had found out through that coordinator, tracking Dad's decline step by step while pretending to be an attentive son-in-law. He didn't quit his job out of sudden impulse. He had spent the last half-year timing his exit, treating my father's final months as a countdown to his personal financial bailout. Our entire 4-year marriage hadn't been built on love, mutual respect, or shared dreams. It had been a calculated waiting game, designed by a desperate man waiting for my father to die so he could pay off his secret debts with another man's life savings. On Wednesday morning, my phone lit up with a call from Walter Sterling. Walter had been my father's corporate and personal estate attorney for over 30 years, a formidable, sharp-witted man who knew the legal landscape inside out. He requested my presence at his downtown office at 2 o'clock sharp for an urgent, formal reading of my father's final directives. When Mark overheard the conversation, his eyes flared with excitement. He immediately insisted on coming along, brushing off my objections with a smug wave of his hand. He spent the entire morning grooming himself, putting on his most expensive tailored charcoal suit and polishing his leather dress shoes as if he were attending a coronation rather than a solemn legal proceeding. During the drive downtown, Mark's arrogance was unbearable. He tapped his fingers impatiently against the steering wheel, openly talking about firing my father's trusted operations managers and selling off company assets to set up a private hedge fund under his own name. He truly believed he was about to step into the role of a high-rolling tycoon before the sun went down. When we stepped into Walter Sterling's high-rise corner office, Mark didn't even offer a polite condolence. Instead, he strutted past the mahogany conference table, sank into the high-backed leather executive chair at the head of the room, and leaned back with his hands behind his head. "Let's make this quick, Walter," Mark declared loudly, checking his watch with theatrical impatience. "Samantha and I have a very busy afternoon lined up with our private wealth advisors. We know the logistics enterprise is valued in the 8-figure range, so just outline the immediate asset disbursements, transfer authorization protocols, and liquid fund access points so we can sign the paperwork and get on with our lives." Walter didn't flinch. The veteran attorney sat down slowly at the opposite end of the table, adjusted his wire-rimmed reading glasses, and looked at Mark with a gaze as cold as winter frost. He didn't offer a handshake or a smile. He simply rested his hands on a heavy, wax-sealed manila envelope resting in the center of the desk. "Mr. Vance was an extraordinarily meticulous man, young man," Walter said quietly, his voice cutting right through Mark's bravado. "Before a single document is opened or discussed, you must understand that Arthur's estate is governed by precise, legally binding parameters that cannot be negotiated, pressured, or altered by anyone in this room." Walter broke the wax seal on the heavy envelope with a crisp, deliberate snap that echoed through the quiet office. He unfolded a thick parchment document and pulled out a handwritten letter penned in my father's unmistakable, sharp cursive script. Walter cleared his throat, looked up at Mark for a brief second, and began to read my father's words aloud. "To whoever sits in this room expecting an unearned fortune," Walter read calmly, "know that every single dollar in this company was earned with blistered hands, late nights, and unyielding honesty. True wealth is built on character, not shortcuts. I have watched the people around my daughter carefully over the years. I know who loves her for her heart, and I know who has spent years calculating the exact day my life would end just to plunder what I spent 4 decades building." Mark's posture stiffened immediately, the smug grin vanishing from his lips. "Therefore," Walter continued, turning to the formal probate decrees, "I have structured my entire legacy to ensure it remains completely untouched by opportunism. Effective upon my passing, the entirety of the Vance Logistics enterprise, real estate holdings, liquid reserves, and investment portfolios, totaling $14 million, have been irrevocably placed into a generation-skipping discretionary spendthrift trust." Walter paused and looked directly at Mark. "Under the legally binding terms of this trust, the assets are completely shielded from marital commingling, division of property, and third-party claims. They are legally inaccessible to any current or future spouse." Mark's face drained of color as Walter turned the final page. "Furthermore," Walter said with absolute clarity, "my client instituted an explicit conditional clause. Samantha is the sole designated beneficiary, receiving a modest monthly stipend and full discretionary control of the trust's dividends only so long as no joint claims or outside pressures are placed upon the principal. If any spouse attempts to demand access, contest the structure, or force a joint transfer, an automatic disqualification clause triggers, locking all disbursements until a full legal separation is finalized." Walter laid the papers down on the mahogany table with a quiet, final thud. "In short, Mr. Vance left Mark an explicit inheritance of exactly $0.00, specifically barring him from ever touching a single penny of this estate." The silence in the conference room shattered as Mark slammed his fists onto the mahogany table, sending water glasses rattling. He jumped to his feet, his face flushed crimson, his tailored suit suddenly looking ridiculous against his wild, panicked eyes. "This is an absolute joke," Mark roared, his voice cracking with rage. "I quit my job this morning. I gave up my career because she was supposed to inherit this estate. You can't lock me out of $14 million. We are legally married, and I am entitled to half of everything. I will sue this entire firm. I will tie this estate up in court for 10 years, and I'll take every last penny you have." Walter Sterling didn't even flinch. He calmly adjusted his glasses, opened a second manila folder, and slid 3 bound files across the polished table right in front of Mark. "Go ahead and try to litigate, young man," Walter said in a voice steady as iron. "Because the moment you file a single motion, these documents will be delivered directly to the State Attorney General's office and your creditors. Inside this file is a comprehensive record of your unauthorized access to Mr. Vance's private medical charts through a clinic coordinator, along with detailed forensic audits of your $90,000 in concealed offshore debts and your attempt to execute fraudulent pre-orders using projected trust funds." Mark froze mid-sentence, his jaw dropping as he stared down at the evidence. The color completely drained from his face. Before he could process the blow, I reached into my leather briefcase, pulled out a crisp, signed legal packet, and set it directly over the audit files. "These are formal divorce papers, Mark," I said, looking straight into his wide, trembling eyes without a single tear. "Along with an immediate separation agreement that leaves your concealed personal debts entirely in your own name. My father's trust will not cover your liabilities, and neither will I." "Sam, please," Mark stammered, stepping toward me with outstretched hands, his arrogance completely collapsing into frantic desperation. "You can't do this to me. I have no job. I have no income. I have nothing left." "You made your choice the second my father took his last breath," I replied softly. Walter pressed an intercom button on his desk. Within 10 seconds, 2 private security guards entered the office and took positions behind Mark's chair. Walter nodded toward the door. "You have 60 seconds to vacate this building, Mr. Sterling, before we contact local law enforcement to remove you for criminal trespass." Mark stood motionless, completely destroyed, realizing he had traded his career, his marriage, and his entire future for absolute zero. With trembling hands, he grabbed his coat and was escorted out into the cold rain, drowning under mountains of debt he had brought upon himself. The fallout from that afternoon unfolded with absolute finality. Within 48 hours of being escorted out of Walter's office, Mark attempted to contact his old employer, begging to retract his hasty resignation. But the bridges were already reduced to ash. His company had already accepted the resignation, filled his position, and initiated an internal audit into his past accounts. With his credit lines frozen, $90,000 in personal debt bearing down on him, and zero income, the luxury life he thought he was entitled to vanished overnight. The divorce proceedings were finalized 4 months later with surgical precision. Armed with forensic evidence of Mark's concealed liabilities and fraudulent schemes, my legal team ensured that not a single penny of my father's trust was touched. The court ruled that Mark's private debts remained solely his responsibility, while our modest marital home was sold, allowing me to close that chapter completely and start over on clean ground. Instead of losing myself in the bitterness of his betrayal, I poured my energy into honoring my father's true vision. Working alongside Walter, I established the Arthur Vance Foundation, using a portion of the trust's annual dividends to fund vocational scholarships and support independent transport drivers starting their own businesses, just like my dad did 4 decades ago. Stepping into my new downtown office overlooking the city harbor, I finally felt the deep, unshakable peace my father always wanted for me. I wore his silver wristwatch every single day as a quiet reminder of what real strength looks like. Greed is loud, desperate, and fragile, but integrity is patient, calculating, and permanent. Mark thought my father's death was his ticket to an easy life, never realizing that true protectors look out for the people they love even long after they are gone. I didn't just survive the storm my ex-husband tried to create. I walked out of it independent, fully protected, and completely in control of my own destiny.